everyone, it is Delancey. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my November wrap-up talking about all of the books that I read this month. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. So the first book that I read this month was Tell Me Three Things by Julie Buxbaum. Now I read What to Say Next back in October, also by Julie Buxbaum, and I enjoyed the book so much that I wanted to keep reading from this author. And it just so happened that Tell Me Three Things was next in my queue for the Libby app. So I listened to this audiobook for the entirety of a road trip, and I actually really enjoyed it. So this is a YA contemporary. We are following Jessie, who is a high schooler, and after the tragic death of her mom and the quick remarrying of her dad, she is picked up and moved to Los Angeles, where she now has to live with her stepmother, her stepbrother, and she has to attend this very bougie private school. Shortly after her arrival to Los Angeles, she begins to receive mysterious emails from an anonymous source that is offering to help coach her through her first year at this new school. So this anonymous person is giving her advice on who to hang out with, who to avoid, so on and so forth. Part of this book is a coming of age story. Jessie is learning to deal with change, and she's also grieving the loss of her mother. This is a theme that's very common in Julie Buxbaum's books. But this book is also a mystery of high school proportions. We are trying to figure out who this anonymous emailer is. Now, I will say I found the mystery of this book to be a little bit predictable. I had an idea of who the anonymous emailer was after the first few chapters, and I ended up being correct at the end. But I recognize that, especially with contemporary YA, at least in my personal experience, it is difficult to have a healthy balance between scattering obvious breadcrumbs throughout the story versus completely leaving your reader in the dark. So with that in mind, I think that the author did the best she could with what she had. So in conclusion, I would say read this book not so much for the mystery, but more so for the messages and lessons that are conveyed through Jessie's story. Clearly, this book has been written from the author's heart, and I've always appreciated that Julie Buxbaum has written from personal experience, and I think her depictions of grief are just very insightful and meaningful. And thus, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 rating. Really enjoyed it. I think it is a solid YA contemporary choice. The second book that I read this month was With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. So this book was one of the recommended books of the month in my Bookstagrammer friend group chat, and Brea recommended this one, and once again, the book club delivered. This is another YA contemporary. We follow the story of Imani. She is a high schooler living at home with her grandmother, and she is juggling and learning how to balance both school and her passions with raising her daughter. I would definitely classify this book as a coming of age story, a slice of life piece. We watch as Imani takes a culinary class in her senior year. She contemplates whether she should go to college, and she wonders if she should and can pursue her dreams. What really stood out to me in this book was that Acevedo did a really great job describing all of the different foods and dishes that Imani would prepare. It was a very immersive experience, and I had the pleasure of listening to the audiobook, which is narrated by the author herself, so definitely would recommend the audiobook. This book is written in prose, but it definitely has a poetic feel to it, especially when you listen to it being read to you. And that doesn't surprise me because I believe this author has also written some really awesome pieces of poetry. Another 4 out of 5 star rating. I highly recommend it. A wonderful YA contemporary novel. And like I said, definitely pick up the audiobook if you can. It really does a great job at bringing the story to life. The third book that I read this month was Dash and Lily's Book of Dares by Rachel Kahn and David Levithan. This was yet another YA contemporary, but it was on my holiday TBR, so I was very excited to finally get around to it. This audiobook quickly became like my go-to book that I would always listen to whenever I would go out running. So this is a dual perspective novel. We are following Dash and Lily as they go about pen paling one another through this red leather notebook that they will leave in secret spots around the city, basically daring each other to do crazy things, solving each other's riddles, basically trying to outwit one another but also flirting with each other. It definitely has the elements of a young romance book, and it also takes place in New York City right around the holiday season, so great selection for a seasonal read. It definitely gave me some John Green vibes at times, especially towards the end. it was like groups of high schoolers discussing very existential, philosophical topics, and I probably was just hanging out with the wrong groups of kids in high school, but I never had any friends that sat around in a circle and like pondered what true love is. But that aside, I think this book could be very meaningful and impactful for a young person of the right type. I think this book is really great for someone who loves reading and really appreciates the literature world. About 50% of this book takes place or is involved with a bookstore. Both Dash and Lily love to read, and a lot of their conversations deal with classical pieces of literature and poetry or certain authors. All in all, I just didn't find this book to be entirely memorable for me personally, and I might have just been out of the age group, but it definitely had its quirky, funny moments, and it served as a great distraction during my workout, so I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. And the final book that I read for the month of November was Pupcakes by Andy England Noblin. This was yet another contemporary, an adult contemporary. It was also on my holiday TBR, and I feel like I've talked about Pupcakes a lot already in my past few videos, so I'll try to be brief and not repeat myself too much. This is the story of Brea. She is a recently divorced 30-something-year-old who is given the opportunity to house sit for a woman who has recently been admitted to a retirement home. And with this job comes the caretaking of this woman's pug, Teddy. So this book is all about change, about Brea trying to start over, a second chapter of her life, and making new relationships into this new town that she has just moved into. Now, I want to say, I think this cover and the marketing for this book is a little misleading because first impressions, when I looked at this book, I thought it would be a holiday read, and while Christmas is kind of included in this book is really a mashup of the fall and winter seasons. In fact, we don't even get to December until about 85% of the way through the book. I feel like the bulk of the plot and really the climax of this book takes place around Thanksgiving, so this is more so like a November book. Nevertheless, this book reminds me so much of a Hallmark Christmas movie. It's very soft and fluffy, and the ending is very predictable. The stakes are very low. I also found the writing to be quite simple and straightforward. Nevertheless, as I've mentioned in previous videos, I think this book served its purpose for me. I was listening to it during a very stressful time, and it's so fluffy and soft and predictable that you don't have to stress about listening to every single sentence or detail. So I think I listened to it at the best possible time that I could in my life. You know, it was fine. I have no regrets, but I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5 stars. All right, you guys, that is gonna do it for my November wrap up. Comment down below how many books you read this month, and if you have any comments about the books I mentioned here today. I'm gonna go study for finals now, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!